Welcome to the Vision Gap Show. Align your big idea and vision with a plan of action to resonate and stand out in your market. With your hosts, Andy Halko and Tony Zayas.
Hello and welcome to today's episode. We're going to be talking deeper on the topic of AI, how to understand what's going on and prepare for what's coming. So Andy, AI is a topic that we love to talk about. What are we thinking for this week?
Diving into AI, I was at an event yesterday telling everybody, and it's even interesting just, how folks have different views of AI and how it's going to impact us. But I think there is a reality that it's obviously impacting everyone. And so today, I think we can talk about it at maybe a little bit of a 30,000 foot view versus some of our other discussions. And one of the places that I thought was good to start is kind of two main flavors of AI that people may not be that familiar with, because they're really, it's become popular lately off of this generative AI, but forms of AI have been around for, quite a long time, right? And so, the two big flavors really are predictive. And this has been around for a while. One of the big things when you think about predictive is it's looking at numbers over a period of time and creating predictions for the future. What I like to use the example is, I love this in the medical space. If you look at 1,000, 10,000, 1 million MRI scans, and you can really understand, the computer starts to understand the predictability of whether something has, someone has cancer or something like that. It's using data to be able to make predictions. And this is being used in, retail spaces of prediction for pricing. It's being used in medical. It's being used in just tons of different industries to take large sets of data and be able to really create these predictive models to have a high authority on what might happen based off of the data that's inputted.
And that predictive, I think that is the version of AI that has been in play for some time now. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's been growing. I think one of the things that's happened for both of these is AI's ability to analyze things. Like that's what has gotten really good over the last couple of years. And as an example with imagery, AI really started out very basic and being able to, look at images and over time identify, okay, there's a dog in this image, right? And so both for generative AI and predictive AI, that kind of fundamental being able to pull out data from like images and other things, text, that's where underneath both has been really powerful. But predictive AI has been around for a long time. But both of these have been kind of continuing to improve based off that ability to really use AI to analyze both text and images.
And then the more widespread, I think more recently, and I think a big part of this is the generative AI we've seen on like the consumer side, where everybody and anybody can use AI to make things.
Well, I think the reality is generative AI is a little bit more sexy, right? Predictive AI, you're putting in a bunch of data sets and you're getting an answer. Is it this or will this happen? Generative AI, where you're creating text and you're creating articles and you're creating images and videos, it's just purely more sexy and fun to deal with than predictive. And so I think that's one of the big reasons that it just has kind of slingshot the conversation around it, even though AI has been around. And so generative AI is really interesting because if you break it up and you really dive into what it is, it's actually just, it's taking a word or a pixel and it is kind of predicting what the next one should be. And so it's really interesting, if you dig into the technical aspect of it, and I don't want to go into it too much, but really it's taking millions of data sets of other text. And it's saying, if I put, these 5 words in, here is the best word that would be next based off of all this data that I've got. And it's even broken into tokens. That's why when, we deal with AI from a back-end standpoint, you're doing it based off of tokens. And they've actually turned every word into a number, and that's just faster for the computer. The process is the number. So every word's a number. And it's interesting because you put these numbers in and it's looking at these huge sets of things that it's scanned, and it's predicting what should be the numbers that come after it based off of that. And so it's a little bit weird and scary to think of, like, at the end of the day, the computer is just processing numbers and predicting and saying, based off of seeing 10 million articles, it is the best likelihood that 5, 7, 8, 9, 10 comes after 4, 3, 2.
Yeah,
and
which
that's
is
literally how it's producing this stuff.
Yeah, wild stuff.
It is. If you dig in the technical aspect of it, it is really crazy. And if you get into the building with it, you pay based off of tokens. And at first, it's like, what is a token? But if you look into it, a token is a word or a number. And that's really what they're doing. And you get a certain number of tokens that you're going to predict. And so that's what it's producing. And I think that does line up well with what we really wanted to talk about today, which was breaking AI requests and prompts into multiple steps. One of the big learning lessons that I've gotten out of working with AI is that it really needs to be, you get the best result if you are breaking it into smaller tasks and then producing something at the end. And a great example that we've used in the past is writing articles. If you go to ChatGPT and you say, write me an article on this topic, you're going to get something back that is not as quality as if you went through a process that we go through with our own software, where we say, okay, let's create a brief about this article. And there's 5 different prompts, basically, where one, it's saying, what does the audience want to get out of this? What key points should we have? What's our unique position? How do we communicate this in our voice? And we're actually doing 4 or 5 prompts there to create a brief. And then we take that brief and we send to the AI and say, create us an outline based off of this information, the brief. You then break up that outline into different sections, and then you write drafts for each of the sections of the outline one at a time. And you get a result that is probably 20, 30 times better than if you had just put in that prompt for creating the article.
Yeah, and prompting is interesting because what I found is that I like to, if I jump into ChatGPT, I like to basically have a conversation where I tell ChatGPT what I'm looking for, and I give guidance like, hey, tell me if you need more. After it responds with something, I ask questions about what it responded with. So it ends up being not just a single prompt, but a back and forth discussion almost. And that's essentially what's under the hood in that article writing process that you're talking about in Frictionless, because it's the back and forth that allows you to refine, add more info. Because you're ultimately, if you want to give it one request, you don't know the perfect, all the details, everything to provide. It's easier to do if you provide a little bit and then it gets back to you with feedback and then you respond, so on and so forth. So it's interesting, and you learn to really the power of it as you go through and work with it like that. But I think what's cool about Frictionless is that removes the need for any prompt. So it's essentially promptless, because you're pulling in all this different pieces of information, different aspects of strategy, of audience, all these things, so that you can make common requests for things that are necessary in building business strategy, right? That's what the whole goal of Frictionless.
We've honed both the process and the prompts for people so that it's pretty invisible, which is what I think is always important for folks. They want it to feel invisible. And so I think just the fact that we built a tool that understands this is the right process to go through to get a good result, and, based off of the inputs that we're asking you for, we've already curated the right prompts around that. But I did want to, point out one of the reasons I started where I did with that predictive and generative and talking about the tokens is, I sometimes think it helps to understand why these things are happening. The reason that steps work better, if we go back to that tokens, that, it's numbers and the computer's predicting what's the best number. Obviously, your inputs are going to help it predict better. Mm-hmm. And so if you think of it, when your input is very wide and it's very open, the computer's ability to predict what the best word is after is going to become more wild. It's going to become more, all over the place. And that's why people see that, what they call the hallucinations, where ChatGPT just starts talking random stuff because, all of a sudden, like, it just went off the rails because that prediction starts getting a little bit crazy and it starts following different paths. But when you start breaking it into steps, you're actually just narrowing its ability to predict, and you're making it, more focused. And I think, and I just share that just because I think it's good to understand that there is a science and there is technical math that goes behind this idea that you really need to break everything into smaller steps and build upon it, because that is using the underlying technology to its best ability. And so there is good value in understanding how sometimes these things work, because it does produce, like, this is how we get the best out of it, right?
Yeah, and I think that's an area that a lot of people are trying to figure out, that efficiency of use to be more effective with it. And there's frustration when people get the hallucinations or don't just get fairly generic output.
Frustrated, or it's funny, right?
Yeah, at times it can be really funny.
But this is where, you're trying to get something done, and obviously understanding how it works can help you be more effective, get the right results out. And I think as we built Frictionless, our own tool that's really integrated with AI, we've really focused on that across the board, is, breaking bigger ideas into smaller chunks and putting them in the right order. And then curating the right information from our users, the people that are using Frictionless, to go into those progressive prompts. And that's allowed us that when you and I, sometimes we do demos and things and we're like, oh my God, that came out so well. It's not luck, right? It's been honed and curated correctly to produce these right results, because we understand the base technical level of it, and then we've optimized the process for it.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I think the other thing that Frictionless does, and I think we talked about this in our last conversation, is just picking the right methodology, the right approach to produce an output. So AI has this fairly, not unlimited, but it feels like unlimited knowledge base that it's working from. And if you don't give it, a framework for it to produce an output for a type of strategy, and, there's a whole bunch out there for every little thing you're trying to do, it's just going to pick one. So what Frictionless does is taking the experience that you have, that, you've worked in this space and in developing go-to-market strategies, and it picks the ones that are programmed into there as the output. So it's pretty powerful. And to your point, the number of times that we've done the live demos and seen the output, and it's a testament to that process and it working.
100%.
So where do you see generative and predictive AI, put your futurist hat on? Where are things going with all this as it takes over?
I think that what you're going to see is continued improvement in both the way that it generates. They're releasing, I think they released it yesterday, was a model from OpenAI that is much better at solving complex problems in science and math, and so what they're doing is they're just getting better at their own model of saying, this is how we're going to pull the right answers based off of the inputs that are in there, how it processes through, and it determines. They're obviously scanning more data because the more that they put in and the more information that they're putting in there, the better it gets at the predictions. And then on the predictive AI, and then I think what you're going to see too is AI's ability to analyze imagery, text, and all of these things to actually process it into data that it can use is going to get better. And so, you're just going to see continued improvement and accuracy that's just going to keep going into these tools that they're just going to get better.
Yeah, I remember 10 plus years ago, the talk about big data and all the marketing conferences and whatnot, we're talking about big data. But I feel like not just now, AI is the only way that's been able to actually execute on that. That was the promise and the hope. But it was still like, well, how do we do it? Is it still a fairly manual thing? And now we're seeing that stuff come to life through AI. So it's pretty fascinating, exciting. And it's sometimes
the piece is going to be what data it has access to. Obviously, some of these AI companies are facing challenges with copyright and the data that they've accessed. Organizations don't want their data inputted into it. But the funny thing is obviously the more that they can pull in, the better that these things get. So it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out of, what companies will allow them to process data. Like Reddit is a big one of giving access to all of those comments and information. It's just a ton that they can process, but with big corporations like Facebook or, others that are sitting on mounds and mounds of data, what will they do eventually to allow that to come in, which will only help the model get smarter, both from its breadth of information, but also how well it can produce outcomes. So it'll be interesting to see from that standpoint, how the world kind of handles that situation.
Fast changing, fast moving, and most of it is unprecedented. So definitely interesting times and interesting and exciting, nerve-wracking to see kind of what comes next, all of the above. So awesome. Well, thanks everybody. We will be back next week with another episode, but appreciate you tuning in. See you next time.
This episode of the Vision Gap Show has been brought to you by Frictionless. Build high-impact strategy at scale. Create your vision, brand position, and go-to-market strategy, all in a collaborative AI-enabled workspace. Visit frictionlesshq.com to create your free account today.